My first love from my own volition was hip hop music. First two CDs I got were Fear of a Black Planet and License to Ill. So from a very young age, like I've just always loved hip hop and it's made its way into our music. But I love juxtaposition and contrast. I think that's what makes really good art. And so being able to mix hip hop elements with shoegaze and droney music and indie was the goal.
I'm Justin J, and this is The Plug. As airline ticket prices, hotel rates, and food costs continue to rise, long-distance travel is becoming increasingly out of reach for many. But what if there was a way to explore the world with your closest companions and get paid to do it? Today's guest found a way to leverage his passion for being in the studio and making music into a career traveling the globe and performing with his best friend. He's one half of the musical duo Phantogram. Alongside his partner Sarah Barthel, they've released 5 LPs and collaborated with some of the most acclaimed names in the music industry, from Big Boi to the Flaming Lips. Their music blends a foundation of heavy beats with atmospheric, genre-defining elements inspired by artists ranging from Sparkle Horse to Sonic Youth to David Bowie. Their latest album, Memory of a Day, is available now. So how does a white kid from a small town in upstate New York end up getting to hang in the VIP area of an Atlanta strip club with Dave Chappelle and Big Boi? And why doesn't commercial success guarantee that you'll have certain amenities when touring with a stadium rock band like Kings of Leon? We'll find out as we sit down for a chat with the soft-spoken and unassuming producer behind the certified gold hits When I'm Small and Blackout Days. Today, artist, producer, and lifelong hip-hop fan, Mr. Josh Carter. All right, get everything you need?
Think so.
All right.
Yeah.
Josh, thanks for making the trek down here.
Yeah, man.
So like I said before, we've met a couple times on the festival circuit, and we have a couple of mutual connections. I've worked with Big Boi a bunch. Also a big shout out to our esteemed colleague, Mr. Ryan Bucci, for help making this happen.
Hell yes.
And I've also been informed that your preferred moniker is Josh motherfucking Carter.
I mean, that's not my preference, but it's kind of what people call me. So
okay, so moving forward.
Yeah.
All right. So, you guys just got off tour with Kings of Leon.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I've been following those guys' career for quite a long time. I was shooting a lot with the Strokes when they first came up. And those two bands were kind of like in the same graduating class, if you will.
Right.
Same era, same label. It's funny, though, because Kings of Leon are almost like this scrappy little Southern fried rock band that became a massive stadium act. You know, and it's really impressive. And, I'm wondering, touring with those guys, did you get a sense that there was a lot of crossover with your fan base, or were you playing to a lot of people, you get the sense that they were kind of discovering Phantogram for the first time?
I think a lot of people were discovering us for the first time because it seemed like their fans are very, very like just hardcore, but we made a lot of fans, and the reason why I know that is because we sold a shit ton of merch. So I don't think people would buy our stuff if we didn't win them over,
Yeah.
So the shows went well. Definitely by the end, like towards the end of our set, because the stadiums were still kind of filling in, the crowd would get more wild and,
Yeah, I mean, did you guys have to start to empty stadiums sometimes and then end to a full stadium?
Yeah, sometimes, because I think they messed up the adverts and said that the show started later, so like some people were like, man, I just came for you guys and I totally missed your entire set.
Oh, it's a bummer.
Yeah, but for the most part, they were like maybe half full, and then half full. I like to be optimistic.
And then you got them. You guys got them fully primed by the end.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm always curious to hear stories about, the politics of amenities of dressing rooms between like a support act and a headline
Yeah.
act, or even different acts on the festival circuit.
Yeah.
Has Phantogram, have you guys ever had an experience of being stuck like out in a field somewhere next to an outhouse, and then there's some other big band with like an air conditioned trailer and like a juice truck and shit like that?
We have, I don't know what I should say, but I'll just say that our last tour, we didn't get much room. They had like 60 people touring with them. 60.
Wow.
Which was, but we've toured with even bigger acts like Muse. They're massive. We did seven shows in Paris at one of the biggest arenas in a row. And they would go out with us, give us like plenty of space, take us out partying and stuff. And with Kings, we didn't get much space and we didn't hang out with them.
Interesting.
At all. Like the very last night, they invited us to hang out with them.
Is the 60 people, does that represent, it's like friends, family, production staff?
It's all production, all like production and, like roadies and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it that big of a production and security?
Yeah, they put on a huge production. It's like big screens and they would have a change mid-set of like lighting and everything. So it was...
What about you guys? Like, was this set up like what you would traditionally tour with, or was this pared down?
It was pared down.
It was like a festival production.
A lot. Dare I say, less than a festival.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a different tour for us, for sure. We're used to a lot more.
Is it at this point in your career? Is it humbling or is it just frustrating?
I think it was a little bit of both. I was just happy to be back on the road, honestly. So I didn't care, but it was a little frustrating considering we've gotten much better treatment from other bands. But again, I'm just happy we get to do it.
Yeah, I mean, do you under normal circumstances, do you guys have anything on your rider that's like out of the ordinary or like a non-negotiable? I mean, do you have like a favorite cheese or alcohol or something kind of wacky?
Yeah, well, we've put funny things on the rider before. We used to do hard-boiled eggs, and we would just put them on our drummer's stool right before the show so we'd sit on them. But I'm thinking of like non-negotiables. It's pretty basic. Like we're pretty easy to please, like just cold cuts and wine. Like on like a headline tour, we have like 6 bottles of wine and a bunch of beer, maybe a bottle of Espolòn Reposado.
And is the hard-boiled egg that was prank oriented, not like because I know there's like that famous story of Van Halen putting the colored M&Ms on their rider just to make sure that people actually read their rider. Right. Because if they screwed up and there were I forgot the color, the green M&Ms that weren't supposed to be there, then there was probably something more consequential that was overlooked as well.
Exactly, like pyrotechnics and all that.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was explaining that to my guitar guy the other day because he thought it was just people being prima donnas, and I was like, no, there's a reason, so like they don't read everything. They could get like seriously injured or something like, so.
How many people do you guys normally travel with, like on your own tour? Is it
on our own tour?
Half of Kings, or I mean, is it pretty pared down?
Oh no, we tour with like, about like for a headline tour, maybe I want to say 16 people, maybe 14, 16.
Tight operation.
Yeah, just 2 buses and a semi.
Do you generally like going out on tour? I mean, if you had a choice, would you be the guy that just sits in the studio and makes music, or do you almost view getting to perform in front of people as the like payoff for all the hard work in the studio?
I would definitely just be in the studio.
Yeah.
I like performing, but I just like making music. I like creating.
Has that changed over your career or as you gotten older? I mean, it seems like, because from a teenager, it seems like it would be the funnest thing in the world to get to travel with like your best friends and get fucked up and meet girls. And be in front. I mean, it seems like it'd be really fun at first, but like as a grown ass man, it would be really challenging.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we spent years of like heavy partying and we still get down and all that, but sometimes after shows, we just want to like chill, drink a little bit of wine, and go to our bunk on the bus, I did, however, like, so Sarah and I wanted to travel the world. And when we started the band, I was like, listen, like, if we're going to travel the world, once we make this band work, was like, we're gonna do it. So that's allowed us to be able to travel and go to different countries and all that, which is amazing. That's probably my favorite part of tour. You know, I've been to Australia a few times and, you know, all over Europe.
Yeah, you really realize when you get to travel for work. I mean, obviously it becomes a challenge at some point, and you know, it's in a lot of endurance, and you know, it's tiring. But you got to put it in perspective. It's like some people work 50 weeks a year at some real job to pay for 2 weeks in you know, Paris or Epcot or wherever, you know? And it's like, I almost prefer traveling with a production or having work because like stuff's taken care of for you know? Like,
it's really not that bad at all. When I catch myself being a whiner, I'm like, wait, and this is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
The money for nothing and chicks for free, as the saying goes.
Sure. Not quite the same anymore, I don't think. Yeah.
I want to talk about your production style for a second.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I hear a lot of really varied influences in Phantogram. I mean, everything from Bowie, Prince, you know, Flaming Lips. And the production itself feels like it has a lot of hip hop DNA in it, you know, and there's like these big, meaty break beats. And some of the older tracks even have like intentional record hiss, like what you would hear in like a vintage, you know, hip hop sample.
Yeah.
As a non-musician, that pretty much exhausts my technical definitions of what it is. I mean, how would you describe your production style? Or is there something about other people's production that you really don't appreciate that you consciously set out to avoid when you sit down to make a track?
Interesting. Well, I don't really like slick sounding music, you know? And so when we started, I really liked the dirty aspect of sampling. And at the time I wanted to make music that I wanted to hear, you know? I mean, there's a lot of stuff I don't like. I'm very opinionated. So when we started Phantogram, you know, I just wanted to make music that I wanted to listen to. And at the time I wasn't hearing a lot of stuff that, you know, contemporary stuff that I was really enjoying. So I was like, well, I'll just make stuff that I want to listen to myself. But going back to the hip hop thing, I grew up, my first love from my own volition was hip hop music. First 2 CDs I got were tapes, were Fear of a Black Planet and License to Ill. So from a very young age, like I've just always loved hip hop, and it's made its way into our music.
And those are 2 very specifically produced albums too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Which is funny. Actually, Fear of a Black Planet has a lot of dust and hiss on it, which I think is great. And then there's like 36 Chambers, which like changed my life at the time. But I grew up on all kinds of music. Like my parents listened to the Beatles and the Stones and David Bowie, actually Hunky Dory over there. It's probably my favorite Bowie record.
It's great.
And classical music, jazz. And, you know, I listen to bands like Nirvana, it's My Bloody Valentine. I like Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., Slow Dive. Like, so I like so much music. I was trying to figure out how I can incorporate all my influences into one thing and make it sound good, you know, because often it doesn't work, you know. But I love juxtaposition and contrast. I think that's what makes really good art. And so being able to mix like hip hop elements with shoegaze and droney music and indie was the goal. And I think we've kind of...
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of contrast in your music. Sarah's voice is beautiful, and some of the themes of her lyrics are really kind of very different than the music that's backing it. I think it works really well together.
Thank you.
What's the creative process between you and Sarah? I mean, like how fleshed out and refined are ideas before you present it to her? Are you working on stuff together from inception, or is it more of a 2-stage process?
It's different every time. Like I make beats all the time, and for a while for years I was doing sound journals. So instead of writing, I would just record every day, like anything. But I would come to Sarah with beats, and she would go through my archives and pick out stuff that she liked. She's like, oh, this is awesome, we should do something with this. Or we'll just write together, you know, like I'll just take I'll make a beat or something, like a very simple beat, and we'll just jam and write over it sometimes the way I sample things off records informs like how the song is gonna get structured in a way. So it's different every time.
Do you ever kind of work the opposite way? You reverse engineer, like, Pharrell famously, he's like, oh, I want to like make this, Blurred Lines. I want it to kind of sound like this Marvin Gaye track. I mean, it came back to bite him significantly in the end.
Yeah.
But I mean, do you ever kind of like set out to write a particular type of vibe or song?
I do. And it always turns out to be different, which is cool. It's like the journey. But pretty much I just follow my instinct. I don't try not to think too much about it. But yeah, when I'm like, oh, I want to write a song like this, that, or the other, it definitely turns out to be way different than I imagined it.
A mind of its own and a path.
Yeah.
How do you guys settle creative differences or kind of, I don't want to say conflicts, but if you have a disagreement about a direction, like is it a democracy? Or do you guys kind of have your own little lanes that you stay in? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, we argue a bit sometimes. Sarah and I are best friends though, so we think a lot alike, so it makes it easy. But we'll have disagreements on like cadence of how she's singing or how something sounds or levels of like the guitar is too loud, the snare drum's too loud, etc. But I think it's pretty easy to come to an agreement.
You guys generally see things the same way. Yeah,
I'd say so.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your production process as a band. And, you know, one of the themes that I'm always really curious about when I talk to musicians is their relationship with the term producer, because it's such a ambiguous and kind of dynamic definition. And, you obviously have a really distinct method and vision for how you want the band to sound on a kind of micro granular level. But do you guys ever work with outside producers to kind of help shepherd more ambiguous, like macro level decisions? Like, for instance, like we had Nikolai from The Strokes on here recently.
Okay.
And he was talking a lot about working with Rick Rubin as a producer.
Oh.
And, some of the most consequential decisions and input that Rick gave, it wasn't so much about like how to mic a drum set or how to track this guitar or whatever. It was more like, hey, let's rent a house in Costa Rica and I'll live in the house and record down there. And, I want you guys to jam an hour a day, just the five of you together every day before we even start the session, stuff like that. Yeah. And, those decisions and that input like really informed the vibe of the album overall. And I'm wondering, like, have you had any similar experience with Phantogram? I mean, are you a very in-house production or do you kind of bring outside people for a different perspective?
Yeah, it's been different for every record. I mean, so our first two records, I produced completely. And, so I was the driving force behind everything and the sound and all that. Even the way Sarah sang, I was kind of like directing everything back then. Because Phantogram is her first band and her first time in her life ever doing music, So, but eventually we've worked with co-producers, Ricky Reed, who he was really great at just making sure everything's on time. Like, just keep moving. Because sometimes my problem is, like, I'll have to start at the beginning of a song again and kind of, like, listen and feel it out. And he'll just be like, no, we're going off to the next section and, like, write it and figure it out.
So less of a creative force, but more just like, we got to keep this train moving and keep it on schedule and just kind of move the production forward. Yeah,
maybe not less of a creative force, but just making sure we're, like, moving. But our new album was pretty cool. We did it with John Hill, who's become a good friend of ours. And he co-produced Voices, our second full length. And since the pandemic, we had just been writing and kind of feeling a little bit lost, but because our last album came out literally the week that the world shut down.
That's crazy.
So we did Jimmy Kimmel, and then I think the next day or 2 days later, it was like, all right, you're on lockdown, and everything was done. So we spent, the past 4 years just kind of casually working on music. And so the point I'm trying to make is with the new album, we sort of piecemealed it together and didn't feel any pressure. And working with John, we would just jam and make new ideas all the time. And then maybe we take a few weeks off and then go back in the studio. So there was really no pressure. And
Can you give an example of something that John brought into the mix that changed the final product that you guys wouldn't have really done otherwise?
yeah, I mean, I think John is really unique. He has like a cool vision, and we see really eye to eye with him as well. But he has so much cool gear. He's always he buys like a new guitar pedal every day, you know? So we experiment a lot. And that's what I love about working with him. I don't know how he really works with other musicians, but I know he really likes working with us because we experiment a shit ton and just always seeing what things might sound like through this amp or this pedal or this tape machine. So it definitely informs the sound of the new record.
And when you're experimenting like that, is it useful to have another set of ears to be like, oh, wait, stop. What did you just do? That sounded amazing. And kind of like force you to like integrate or redo something that you would have maybe just tossed away otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why. So it's co-produced. So John and I feed off each other.
Yeah.
But you know, Sarah has a lot of input too. So we're all kind of like try to record as we go and catch ideas as they come. And, yeah, and be like, oh, that's like that was awesome. Like, let's roll it back and get that. Yeah.
And, you know, I guess speaking of recording in a specific place in order to, you know, kind of cultivate a particular vibe, talk to me about working with Big Boi in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah.
I spent a little time down there when I was shooting with Outkast, and I don't know what it is about Atlanta. I don't know if it's like the politics and the racial history or the thick humidity in the summer or strip club culture, but there's something about that city that like you can hear Atlanta as a character in some of those old Outkast tracks. You know what I mean? Did you get a chance to fully like immerse yourself in the Big Boi lifestyle?
Yeah. So we would go back and forth from LA and Atlanta and work at Stankonia. But when we were kind of trying to wrap up the record, I went out by myself and stayed at Big's house for like 10 days or something and just was at the studio every day and hanging out with him at his house and, you know, having dinner with his family, stuff like that. Yeah, we were just hanging and it's a vibe. Atlanta's definitely a serious vibe. Strip clubs a lot.
Yeah.
I think one of the coolest things I can tell people just for bragging rights is I went to Magic City with Big Boi and Dave Chappelle, just the three of us.
Wow.
And it was like, holy shit, what's going on right now, you know? And like they roped us off and it was surreal, you know? And, you know, one of my favorite comedians and one of my favorite rappers, Outkast, is a huge influence on Phantogram as well. So yeah, Atlanta has a vibe, definitely.
Did you ever have an experience of like feeling like kind of a fish out of water moment down there, or do you find that whole camp just to be so accommodating?
They're super welcoming there. Like his whole crew, very nice people. But yeah, it definitely feels kind of like a fish out of water, you know, like I'm just this white boy from upstate New York, you know, like I'm from the sticks in the middle of nowhere and way up north, and this is southern, and like very different and urban and very different.
Yeah. How's it been? Has there been a difference in your perspective moving from upstate New York to California? Because I feel like upstate's such a, especially growing up in Manhattan or living in Manhattan, upstate's such a funny term because it seems to encompass anywhere from like the Catskills to Buffalo, you know?
Right.
And it tends to, sometimes people in Manhattan are kind of snotty about it. It tends to be a little bit of a conversation killer. You know, there's not, when you say you're from upstate, there's often not a follow-up question. It's like the equivalent of saying you work in finance and everyone's like, oh, that's interesting. What do you do? I'm like, oh, Schenectady. What's that like?
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people think upstate is just like even White Plains or like shit, fucking Yonkers. Yeah. You know, but we're from way up and we're equidistant from Montreal and New York City. But so I lived in New York, in Brooklyn, for the better part of 10 years before I moved to LA, and I prefer New York City.
Was that in the like quote unquote like Williamsburg era, like when that was first coming online?
Yeah. Well, when I was like 19, I moved to downtown Brooklyn, over off Flatbush, like the Borough Hall stop on the F train. And it wasn't a very good neighborhood back then. And then I moved back to like Greenpoint and Williamsburg and all, just kind of stayed in that, you know.
And were you doing
hipstery.
music then?
Yeah. Yeah. We had started Phantogram and we were full steam ahead.
And what inspired you to move out west after living there?
I was in the middle of moving and all my shit was in storage in Brooklyn. And we finished a tour, a pretty long tour. And it's November, late November. And we're in LA and I'm walking around in a t-shirt. I'm like, wait a second, it's like November 22nd. And I'm in a t-shirt and it's warm and beautiful. So I was like, shit. So I just started Airbnb-ing around the Silver Lake Echo Park area and decided to stay. You know, and I bought a house there about 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny. People from New York, they're like, "Oh, you're gonna move to California and you know, go soft." You're like, "Yeah, kind of. That's my point." You know,
right.
Be able to like wear a t-shirt in November and like you know go to the beach and you know sunshine on my face, drive instead of dealing with the A train.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I miss pedestrianism. That's my biggest complaint about LA is like people are like, "Do you like New York or LA better?" And I'm always like, "I like New York better because I like walking around. I like the energy, the vibe. You know, in New York, you can make buying a pair of socks like a whole excursion, a whole day into
go to the sock district.
Yeah, you know. But like, you stop at this coffee shop and this bodega, and you're on a first name basis with people, and there's so much to see and do on your way to get a pair of socks. You know, in LA, if you need a pair of socks, you hop in your car. Maybe sit in your car for 45 minutes, an hour, park, go into the sock store or whatever, get your socks and drive home. And like, that's not really fun to me.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I found so interesting about Phantogram is, you know, despite the obvious hip hop influences musically, you know, lyrically, the band deals a lot with themes of, you know, grief and alienation and depression, you know, some heavy topics. And, you know, in hip hop, in the genre, at least until relatively recently, it's called like, you know, the Drake era. There wasn't really a lot of room in the genre for self-reflection, you know? And then, you know, you cut to 2024, Killer Mike releases his album, which is just phenomenal.
Yeah,
and
so good.
It wins the Grammy. But that album is, I mean, it's incredibly self-reflective and it deals a lot with, you know, atonement for everything from abortion to dealing drugs and you know, and you also have like somebody like Charlemagne who's kind of normalizing being able to talk about mental health issues and stuff like that. You know, that's a big leap for hip hop culture. And you know, Phantogram, you guys have, you know, endured a lot of tragedy in the band and you know, you've written about it as well. As a fan of hip hop, like what are your thoughts on how hip hop is evolving like that?
I mean, I think it's awesome. When Good Kid, Mad City, I mean, Kendrick is really thought-provoking and reflective. And when that record came out, I just thought it was so awesome. Great storytelling and you know, he turned up on a lot of songs, a lot of party songs, but it's very reflective and even To Pimp a Butterfly got even deeper.
Yeah, you can feel the pain in that album.
Yeah. And I think it's a great thing for hip hop. You know, it's a little less braggadocious. Well, now you have the Kendrick and Drake beef. So
I don't know. What was he thinking even stepping into the ring? I was like, that's like Kiss challenging Led Zeppelin to a rock-off.
Yeah, I would never, you know, J. Cole did the right thing and just kind of bowed out, you know. I would never do that.
I mean, it's great. I feel like hip hop still has room for songs like, you know, Cream or Give Me the Loot or Fuck the Police or, you know, like Gin and Juice. But I love that it's evolving as an art form. And, you know, I'm wondering, has that changed your perspective as a band at all? I mean, in terms of what you're able to do?
Well, let's run it back for a second. I think Outkast really made a lot of waves in hip hop. You know, like Three Stacks was rapping about love and stuff on even Aquemini, you know, like when rappers, it was like not cool to rap about loving a woman, you know, it was all just like bitches and hoes and this and that. And like So I think Outkast really kind of paved the way for allowing certain emotions into hip hop music and different sounds, you know. And so Outkast being a huge influence on Phantogram and with new hip hop, it's always made me feel like we can do anything. I've never felt ridiculous about doing anything in Phantogram. There are some songs where I kind of like, I don't like rap, but it's sort of, it has a certain cadence that's could be considered rap in a way, you know. So yeah.
You know, musically, you guys have dealt with some of the tragedy in the band, and you know the project you did with Sparkle Horse, you know, addressing. Yeah. Is that kind of? Do you feel like that either was an influence or maybe helped influence in terms of like what bands felt that they were comfortable talking about in their personal lives?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've suffered from depression and anxiety and I write a lot of our lyrics. So, that's been going on for a lot of my adult life. So it's really informed how I write music. And Sparkle Horse is a huge influence, and I just love his lyrics. They're super dark and depressing. I just kind of gravitate towards music like that. But, you know, even Kurt Cobain was singing about some pretty heavy shit.
Yeah. I mean, even I like the Sparkle Horse, it kind of speaks to the contrast of what you guys do in Phantogram, because it's like he speaks about some really dark themes, but the music is just so like beautiful. You know, it's not like sometimes The Cure gets very dark, you know, musically and thematically. Mm-hmm. But, you know, Sparkle Horse, there's something just very like, I don't know, something so pretty about their music, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's about that juxtaposition, that contrast that makes it so good, you know?
So, you know, we always like to end the show by asking our guests to plug something that they aren't directly involved in, but they feel isn't getting enough attention. Is there something you wanted to shout out? It could be like a book, a movie, a TV show, maybe an artist that you feel like someone should know about, a social cause, anything. What's your plug? What do you want?
Well, I mean, I will say, speaking of the subject, we're very behind the AFSP, and we donate proceeds to our ticket sales to it.
Tell the listeners what that stands for.
That's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And because it's hit us very, very close. So we're very adamant about that. But that aside, and speaking of Sparkle Horse, I learned about a really cool author who sadly killed himself as well, but Breeze DJ Pancake. It's a real name.
Not familiar.
It's real, at least his pen name. And he has a collection of short stories. So I would check that book out. It's like just short stories by Breeze DJ Pancake.
Right on. Well, we'll check it out. And yeah, I think that's good on you for helping raise awareness about suicide and suicide prevention. And well, Josh, hopefully our paths will cross again soon. I appreciate you taking the trek down here, and it's good to get to cut it up, man. I wish you guys the best of luck. I dig what you do.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, man.
Cheers.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening, and a huge thanks to today's guest for dropping in. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and take a minute to rate, review, follow, or subscribe. This episode of The Plug contains original theme music by Andrew Van Weingarten and Dan Drohan. Mixing and sound design by Matt Boynton at Ultraviolet Audio. Logo and branding by Italic at italic-studio.com. And you can check out my photography at justinj.com. Thanks again, and be sure to check out the archive and tune in for future conversations.